WBRN Radio presents This Week in Economics by the Numbers Man division of the Bostonred Network. The date episode is the 29th of March 2020. We live in a very interesting period where the U.S. economy and now parts of the global economy are in an economic downturn. This economic downturn started before the COVID-19 virus arrived and turned into a pandemic. An example, not in macroeconomics, we'll talk about that in a minute, but some in micro, what we have now basically is a downturn, if you can envision being pushed by a bulldozer. Thus, what is created is not only a demand problem, but a supply problem. The whole economic equation is turned on its head. In the U.S. alone, there are 3.2 million people unemployed and made redundant. Many of these people are out of retail and drinking establishments, about 10% of the whole. I was looking at a statistic here of what is going on. Now, you have to sort of slice and dice the economy and across sectors. People that have the privilege of working in certain types of jobs, what we used to call white-collar jobs, are working remotely. But that is not, there are exceptions to the rule, we should say. And we'll look at a selection of people that work independently in the ad industry before the broadcast is over. And we have people that work in factories. Now, there's been a lot of commotion about factory workers in and around Detroit. The GM organization and various others had reopened some plants. The workers objected to it. Now those plants are shuttered for the most part. Ford was talking about opening some plants, but it is not widespread because workers have become ill with COVID-19. The same has applied to some of the facilities of the not too many infinitives here, of the enterprise Amazon. The shipping part in their factories, some have been closed down. One factory in Kentucky is closed or was closed. Some others just closed down briefly and were scrubbed. And then they were back to the proverbial task of shipping out products. So we have different kinds of situations here. A bookseller out in Portland, Oregon, the largest supposedly independent bookseller in the U.S. I think I wrote the name down here. It doesn't mean anything to me. But that particular reseller had about 400 workers, or a little over 400 workers, and they had closed down completely. Now, because of online orders, they have about 100 plus workers that are now back, and they are trying to process the numbers of orders they have. So some industries are continuing along in the restaurant sector. Some of the restaurants, various other types of food entities have transformed into either takeout or delivery services. Now, there are instances that some delivery workers have are virtually going on a strike because of their working conditions. We'll have more on that on the political side. Bostonred. At the present time, I'm looking here at Reuters. There are 115,000 cases in, let's see here, in the U.S. New York has about 40% of those cases. DJ Trump announced on Sunday, where we are actually recording this, the 29th, that the nation would go under the national guidelines until the end of April the 30th. There had been some talk of easing the guidelines around the 12th of April. No such thing is happening. Now, these are guidelines. These are the federal guidelines, not mandatory, but various governors have put in place, including the governor of New York, stay-at-home orders, and that will go into April. No doubt they will be reinstated for another at least 14 days or more. India is locked down for 21 days, and it goes on a very long list of countries there. South Africa, the police and army in the streets, they're on a lockdown also. I believe it's 21 days there. In India, of course, you have over 1 billion people literally locked down, period. So thus, these are the conditions that we operate in as far as the global economy. And in the U.S. now, the Congress has passed a $2.2 trillion rescue bill, and I'm looking at this is from Reuters. United Airlines Holdings and Delta Airlines welcomed, and they got $50 billion relief package. It said it would protect jobs through September, but warned continued challenges faced. The industry will require more action. The American politician Bernie Sanders has already called for another stimulus bill to extend to people that were not included in the $2.2 trillion bill, period. And also, U.S. airlines expect to learn the terms of federal aid meant to protect workers' payroll in the midst of the shutdown in the next 5 to 10 days. Now, for these airlines, there was some speculation that with federal money, the federal government would take a percentage in the airlines. Now, Boeing's evidently out of Seattle decided they would not take the package. And while we are in this state here, BlackRock, now they are in Inc. Will earn less than $8 million a year in fees for their role in the system. This is the Federal Reserve. They've done it before with its purchase of commercial mortgage-backed securities, one of the new programs the central bank has rolled out to backstop an economy on the threat again from the COVID-19 outbreak. The Fed has done various things in their playbook, and more are coming out every day. They've got quantitative easing going on there, and the difference this time around is they've not set any targets as far as the amount of money involved in their buybacks of government securities, mortgage securities, and various other types of securities. This is expanding by the day in terms of what the federal government is doing. Now we'll look at consumer sentiment here from the people at the University of Michigan as to where consumers are. Now, one of the things on consumers, as the pandemic continues, the lockdowns, millions of dollars and billions of dollars are lost. If we just look at sports alone, there are no games being played. The baseball, Major League Baseball, is suspended. Perhaps they'll be able to start up in June on an abbreviated schedule, as even plans to play the season into November. And we don't know how that will turn out, but all other major sports have been delayed. And when you talk about delay in sports, not only do the people that invest in the various franchises lose money, but the workers associated with journalists, various freelance types, cities lose money in terms of the stadiums they have, and the various vendors, restaurants. Of course, they're closed anyway. But enormous amounts of money are taken out of the economy, and at the same time, cities are not getting the tax revenue. So this is an enormous hole for cities and states. Much of it is they are paying out, not paying into those works. And what happens when this eventually, the pandemic, according to some of the models now, that will it will peak in late April. We expect the crash analytics to be more like after May Day, but nonetheless, we're not quibbling with any of the models as far as when it will so-called peak. But after peak, we use Italy as an example. That is the highest rate in Europe, and behind them, Spain, etc. And then you have Iran, various other people. Italy, according to their national healthcare system, which they have a good healthcare system, is overwhelmed, and they also have a larger percentage of older people. But we've also seen now the infant dying in Chicago, and younger people in New York being stricken by the COVID-19 virus that do not have any so-called pre-existing conditions. What this basically tells the U.S. and other countries that the healthcare system must be upgraded. An industrialized nation and must have a national healthcare system, and it must be properly funded. Those are the takeaways here. Let's go to the income part here, and this is personal income. We actually want first. Okay, we'll get it here in a second. This is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The date on this was released on Friday. So this is personal income and outlays for February. Before the virus had an impact, basically in February, personal income increased at 106.8 billion. That is 0.6% in February, according to estimates released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Disposable personal income, which we call DPI, increased 88.7 billion, or 0.5%. Personal consumption expenditure, PCE, increased 27.7, or 27.7 billion. Real DPI increased at 0.4 in February. Real PCI increased at just 0.1. The PCE price index increased to 0.1, excluding food and energy. The PCE index increased, sorry about that, 0.2 there. And we are looking at, go back to October, current dollars is 0.1, that was October 2019, to 0.5 and 0.2 in December, 0.6 in January of 2020 this year, and 0.6 now. Now, current disposable income in February, it was 0.5. It was 0.6 in January, 0.2 in December. You can see where it is going. Now we change that now to 2012 dollars in October of 2019. It was a negative 0.1, and in November 2019 it was 0.4, and in December it was a negative 0.1. In January we had 0.5 and 0.4 there. And personal consumption expenditure, PCE, and that's in current dollars. I just gave you that, sorry about that. Price index, PCE, 0.2 in October, and 0.3 in December of last year, and 0.1 in January, and 0.1 now. So that's basically where that is lining up. And the increase in personal income in February primarily reflects increase in compensation of workers and farm proprietors' income. Farm proprietors' income increased at 34.1 billion in February, which which includes an increase in subsidy payments associated with the Department of Agriculture. The 13 billion increase in real PCE in February reflected 18.3 billion increase in spending for services that were partially offset by a decrease of 7.7 billion spending for goods. Within services, the leading contributor to the increase was spending on electricity and gas. Within goods, the leading contributor to a decrease was spending on motor vehicles, pots, as well as recreation goods and vehicles. Personal outlays increased at 28.4 billion in February. Personal savings at 1.38 trillion, and the personal savings rate as a percentage of disposable income was at 8.2 Updates to personal income outlays have been updated for October through January. I think we talked about that as far as changes were concerned. Here, I want to go back. The next report, incidentally, will be on the 30th of April, which will get a more realistic situation here. Now, we go back to January. This is chained to 2012. Was at a negative 18.9. That was the revised. That was in December to 17.5. These are negative, all negatives. And then we go to January. The previous was 36.2, and it was revised to 68.1. And the revisions this is January. 0.5 and 0.5, no appreciable difference there. So this basically is personal income received by and on behalf of all persons from all sources, from participation as laborers in production, from owning a home or a business, and from ownership of financial assets, from government and businesses in the form of transactions. It includes income from domestic sources as well as the rest of the world. It does not include realized or unrealized capital gains or losses. So these are just some of the definitions they're working with here. Personal consumption expenditures, as PCE, is the value of goods and services purchased by and on behalf of persons who reside in the United States. Disposable income is income available to persons for spending or savings. It is equal to personal income less personal current taxes. So this is a definition. It's always good to look at the definitions. Let's go now to what consumers, and to do that we will go to Reuters and look at their general thing. Then we'll go to the people at the University of Michigan. Anyway, this is U.S. Consumer sentiment drop to a 3.5 year low in March as the coronavirus epidemic upended lives for Americans, and spending was sluggish in February. Strengthening economists' expectations of a deep recession. Well, deep downturn, that can translate very quickly into other things. The report, let's see, we do this, that showed the number of Americans filing for unemployment rocked to, that was 3.28 million last week, eclipsing the previous record of 695,000 set. That was in 1982. The highly contagious virus, this is again COVID-19, is wreaking havoc. The Federal Reserve took extraordinary measures. The U.S. Congress approved the $2.2 trillion. People struggling to understand the magnitude and duration of the economic shock. That is from Chris Lowe, a chief economist at FHN Financial in New York. Job losses are the most valiant demonstration of new reality. As reality sinks in, confidence is likely to fall into the mid-50s by May, and we'll get to that sentiment in a minute. Economists polled by Reuters have forecast sentiment would drop to reading well. Oh, 90. Forget that. The survey gauges consumer expectation tumble, and we'll get to that from them. Governors in more than half the states, there are 50 states, have ordered residents to stay mostly indoors, affecting 100 million people. That's 1/3 of the U.S. population. And the U.S., of course, has more infected people than any place in the world. In a separate report, the Commerce Department, and we didn't have this up, we'll have to give it from Reuters, consumer spending, which accounts for 2/3 of activity, increased at 0.2% last month as households spent more, again, on electricity and gas, offsetting decrease, and we actually gave that out. When adjusted for inflation, consumer spending edged up 1/10 for the second straight month. Millions, of course, are unemployed, and social distancing measures. We talk more about that on the political side in response to the fast-spreading coronavirus. Extraordinary financial volatility there. I don't think we have the volatility index here, but it had gotten up there. Consumer spending grew at an annualized rate of 1.8% in the fourth quarter, slowing from a brisk 3.2 pace that was back in July and September. So you can see the downturn was moving on. Now, historic stimulus package included $290 billion for payments of $3,000 to millions of families. The way that worked out was there was initial payment, of $1,200 and $500 for each. It also increased payments for unemployed up to $600 per week, and laid out workers would get these payments for up to 4 months. Income is one of the 4-month indicators tracked by the National Bureau of Economic Research as a private organization there. We've used their statistics before. The crisis means changes afoot. That's from Tom Quinlan. He's an economist at Wells. A record-shattering increase in jobless claims suggests that transfer payments will likely be the only facet of income rising in the months ahead, with income growth outpacing spending. Savings increased one-year high of, we gave that at 1.38 trillion in February from 1.32 trillion in December. Let's see, what else do we have here? We talked about PCE. We covered that one. The annual increase, so-called core PCE prices, that index, to 1.8% in February, the biggest gain since August, from 1/10 there. The core is the preferred PCE inflation measurement. It missed the bank's target of 2% in 2019. Incidentally, the U.S. economy will see some inflation, but in a downturn situation that you have a major recession, could go into depression, you're going to need some inflation to get out of it. So this 2%, you can throw that out the window. You're talking more about an inflation rate, perhaps anywhere from 5 to 8% there. That will be taken care of in the future. We're into what is called modern economics. That's the running of the deficit. So at 2.2 trillion, the U.S. economy is at about 20 trillion per year. So maybe you say 18 trillion. Anyway, it is, and another installment will come. Anyway, this is from the University of Michigan here. March 2020. The index of sentiment was at 89.1. In February it was 101, and in March of 2019 it was 98.4. The change is a negative 0.8%, and year over year it was a negative 9.5. Current economic conditions at 103.7. In March it was 114.8 in February, and in March of of 19, it was 113.3. The change was a negative 9.7%, and year-over-year month over month. Year-over-year, it was 8.5%. The index of consumers at 79.7, and in February it was 92.1. We assume that was a little high, but anyway. In March of last year, it was 88.8, and the month-over-month change was a negative 13.5, and year-over-year it was 10.2. From Professor Curtin, he's a chief economist there. The next update will be on Thursday. Consumer sentiment dropped 11.9 March, the fourth largest one-month drop in nearly a century. The steepest monthly decline was barely negative 12.7 index points in response to the deepest recession in 2008. That was October 2008. There were two declines of 12.2 tenths in response to the 1980s recession, the Hurricane Katrina, and that was in 2005. Katrina decline was reversed in 3 months, and some observers compare the V-shaped economic episode to expectation impact of coronavirus. What it didn't show is a V-shaped response was the recovery of New Orleans, a closer comparison to today's national economy. The comparative prior decline occurred in 1990 when the sentiment index fell 11.8 points due to the invasion of Kuwait. Subsequently recorded an all-time gain of 17.3 in as March of 1991. Different economy there. It was not as globalized. Nonetheless, those two outsized changes in sentiment index defined the start and the end of the 1991 recession, just as the 1990 and 91 episode, the sentiment index can be expected to decline in the months ahead. The featured chart above shows a 7-day moving average of the sentiment index over the past 2 months. Following trendless variations in February, the index posted sharp declines in March. If consumer sentiment were to stabilize as its most recent 7-day average, it would an additional decline of roughly 18.2% in April, which would almost amount to a record-setting 2-month decline of 30.1. Stabilizing confidence as the month end leaves level would be difficult given the surging unemployment and falling household incomes. The extent of additional declines in May will depend on the success in curtailing the spread of the virus and how quickly households receive funds to relieve their financial hardships. Mitigating the negative impacts on health and finance may curb rising pessimism, but it will not produce optimism. There's no silver bullet could at the end of the pandemic as suddenly as a military victory. Well, that's just a totally different situation. That was working more on a contrived history. The Kuwait War, we remember, it wasn't much of a war to begin with. Effectively, the Iraqi forces under the late President Saddam Hussein had went in to reclaim Kuwait, which was a part of Iraq at one time. And they were there, and then the U.S. and some supposed allies went to execute Saddam and the Iraqi army from there. They did that, closed the war down, and that was the end of that situation there. The next major situation was after we left in the 90s, we had a dot-com boom that pulled the economy out of that recession. That was under the first President Bush. And of course the dot-com came under the election of Bill Clinton. Anyway, to avoid an extended recession, economic policy must quickly adapt to a new era that will reorder the spending and saving priorities of consumers, as well as the relative roles of public and private sectors in the U.S. economy. That's Dr. Curtin from Michigan. Our thought on consumer sentiment is the $2.2 trillion bill passed by the Congress is out there. One of the major problems there is how quickly that money is dispersed to the people that actually need it. And, of course, they will spend it. It will be the old idea of an immediate stimulus there. But part of the problem is bureaucratic establishments using old tactics, in that they should be using more AI and algorithms, similar to the loan organizations that popped up in the last few years. They've sort of retreated, but anyway, those places could determine your credit worthiness using the types of factors that credit bureaus did not use, and they would grant you a loan, be it at a more a credit card type rate. But that type of topology could be used, be very successful, and they could immediately cut the amounts. They say checks, but they'd be electronic payments to people, and they could also do the same as they do for other government benefits, establish debit cards, and that can be done online or by mail or by telephone, basically online. And people are registered, and get people registered very quickly by just simply telling people to register with the federal government. That would include their national ID, tax ID, a social security number, and mailing address, and from that they would be able to issue the debit cards, and those could arrive, or if they already have credit cards, debit cards, accounts, they could so designate that. That would that's the same topology we use with the electronic. I remember when at Cranston we got into electronic filing. We're one of the first in the nation. They had a experimental program the year before, but we actually got into it, and that was in the infancy of electronic filing. No longer necessary. You'd put up deposits, and we were sent the necessary codes, the source code to because we are in the business of doing software development, to develop software programs. Anyway, that's no longer there. The intuitive Quickums of the world and various other people have taken over that. But it could be done the same. You could just simply submit a form online and put that information in. And the last that we heard was that we're going to use the 2018 returns, and as we mentioned in another broadcast, the only problem there is sometimes people did not file in 2018 because they did not own any taxes and were unaware of any possible earned income there. But you can file, incidentally, you can file an amended return if you had income, and even if you didn't, you can file it and wait and see. Now, for people that have been made redundant or unemployed, people are filing for that, but that's a federal program, but it's on the states, and the states have been highly inefficient in doing that. They can easily match that up. That is done again by algorithms, but they insist in dabbling in the process, looking for such things as fraud. Now that's obviously ridiculous. They can look for fraud later in the ball game, get the checks started, and then they can start that investigation in June. There's no big hurry for that. But luckily, in states that have modern unemployment systems, a lot of them have cut it out, almost out in the heart of there. But nonetheless, there will be no wait week once the people are processed, and they'll get an additional $600 for 4 months. Now, there will be no doubt another package. We would like to see another package out there that would extend that, depending obviously on where we are in. This will go out probably mid-April at best. So we're talking about May, June, and July, and probably into August. It will no doubt probably have to be extended, depending on the severity of the pandemic and how many states. There are roughly about 25 states now that have their population shuttered or partially shuttered businesses are closed. Only essential businesses, by and large, are operating. Dentist offices in some states are operating only for emergencies. Even medical offices, they're having people call ahead. Elective surgeries have been canceled. They're going to need the beds for the pandemic. So thus, the nation as a whole is operating on a more part-time basis, but also at the same time, you have people that work in offices and that can work online, and that's worldwide, are working online. So those people are continuing to be paid. And there are some firms that are paying their workers until this obviously aid arrives there. And we'll have more evaluation of this aid package, $2.2 trillion, and where it is going. Some of it obviously will go to the medical community and to various other hard-hit communities out there. There's a lot of different communities out there, and we will break that down when we get the breakdown there. And we'll have also some more from the market people at HMS, some more of these global PCIs, whether it be in manufacturing, sales. We had some, if you have listened to last week's broadcast. So we're trying to make these broadcasts as relevant as we can. This information is somewhat changing. We're seeing somewhat of a pattern, but there are many states. Florida, example, is one of the states we're looking at. We've been doing some modeling here at Crescent Analytics. Florida is a hot spot. It has not been placed on lockdown. And the large state of Texas now. Texas has a poor healthcare delivery system, so does Florida. And those states eventually we expect to be placed on lockdown. So you'll have some very large states, which politically they call red states. And some of the other states, President Trump had suggested that places like Idaho and in Nebraska they could start to open up. It was overruled by the health authorities there, Dr. Fauci, one of those, and it doesn't happen. So we're seeing this, and what happens with behavior, I'm going to get into a little bit of behavior here. That's the behavioral economist, but people start that have been locked down. We've seen some anecdotal evidence of that from China. They want to lock down for basically 2 months. It's starting to ease. President Xi Jinping has said that the Chinese factories will start to open up. They are phasing that. The subways are running. People are now able to come from Shanghai and Beijing and go to Yuan area there. So now that is starting to open. They will gradually open it up. And the key to this is to gradually do it. The unemployment rate, wherever it rests, some people have projected 3 times it. It's what, at about 3.5. So it would be 10%. Some models are running it as high as 20%. Doesn't matter too much there if it's 20% or 30%. What you do is when your stabilization programs start to take effect, you gradually do it. You can't, in other words, you can't move as I think Professor Cretin was talking about here. Curtin was momenting what happened with Karina. Now, that was a different situation. That was New Orleans, and that situation there, it was not a nationwide situation. Totally different. The economy was totally different also. And you bring that rate down from what would be some conservative economists used to call the natural rate. Well, you won't have the natural rate, so you can forget about that one. But if you have, say, 10, 15% or whatever, some places will be much harder hit. We expect the city of New York to be very hard hit because of the nature of the businesses there. So we'll see that happen. And let me just very, very quickly here, we had some workers here that maybe in a different package. This is one we got out of one of the Midwest newspapers here. This is the Star Tribune out in Minneapolis. Downturn, job losses hit white-collar workers. That was in the state of Minnesota, but it'll be very similar there. This is a worker here, self-employed marketing consultant that had the Ryder Cup, the Twin Cities Summer Jam, and some other things there. and soccer matches prior to the International Cup. So you're going to see this in various cities. These workers are being hit. More than 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits, the largest spike since record in 1982. Different economy there. More than 200,000 people in Minnesota have filed for unemployment compensation. Hiring for most firms are frozen. Corporate recruiters are losing their jobs, and this is promotion firms are going dark. Office bookkeepers are being furloughed. Marketing, public relations, and advertising budgets are on hold. This is from Isaac Schaffels, a recruiter who specializes in placing technology executives, said he is staying off the phone. He is home reading historic biographies. Companies will start hiring once again once the shock of the downturn wears off, he says, but trying to drum up new business doesn't make much sense right now. And this has nationwide implications. Somebody is a part-time bookkeeper for a remodeling company. Says that she was in a meeting last Friday where executives said they would stay the course despite concerns business would decline and workers wouldn't be able to work at job sites. Monday afternoon, an email saying I was furloughed. Jacobson said, I wasn't in the office on Monday to exactly know what happened. She typically works on invoices for subcontractors. All that is down. So this is, some of the things that is happening out. Operation analyst who plans manufacturing capacity for some company called Merchology. That's a company that produces brand apparel and other promotion products. The firm has production facilities in Reno, Nevada. First quarter was beating our projection. You're going to hear a lot of businesses play the same record. It took a week in the first week of March, and when he returned to the office, found business was catering. A slowdown in Nevada, the close of the restaurant only in bars in the Midwest. He was furloughed. His wife works at a not-for-profit. She has kept her job. Her salary has been her salary has been cut. Warner isn't sure if he will apply for a different job. Unemployment there. So this is the plight of ordinary workers across various enterprise. The wait time, the 1 week period, of course, is waived. I think we mentioned that earlier. Employers' taxes due to COVID-19 will not be used. Seeking work while benefit the recipient, that has also been gone. Limits for owners, the 5-week benefit limit for business owners is waived due to COVID-19. Apply online, spike request. It's really day to day at this point. How does the hiring process even work? So, we use this because Minneapolis is full of advertising firms that service large corporations like the Targets of the world, etc. Marketing budgets eliminated in near term. They are facing difficult decisions on how to keep paying workers with less revenue, and that is the immediate impact. What will happen to them? A national survey from Fishbowl found that 2/3 of advertising professionals feared layoffs. Job cuts have occurred in at least one firm, but most of the lost work has fallen to freelance workers. That is from somebody named Dean Broadhead, the CEO of Broadhead. That's a creative industry. Definitely tightening down now on employer expenses. And close to the end of the second quarter, clients may start cutting budgets more drastically. It's too early to know. We need to focus on research inwardly as possible, because no one knows if you're going to have independent workers like Yost can't apply for unemployment benefits. That is not true now. Have seen work disappear even after 9/11, which was a horrible event. Sports resumed in a few days, but there's no sports to resume now. So in other words, that is totally different here. And let me finish this up here. I would love to say people overreaching, but if the money is not coming in and money can't go back again, he said, I think people are doing what they need to do. So this is in a state that the number of COVID-19 cases is relatively low compared to obviously New York, Washington State, but it is happening. Period. So again, this is from local companies, the ad business, all of these freelancers out here. There are many freelancers out, and we expect that this will get to be a worsening situation as we move along. The so-called gig economy. We didn't mention the Uber drivers, Uber and Lyft and etc. But there are many more of these places, because it's becoming very common for enterprises to use what we used to call these extra contractor types, independent workers. What will happen when this is over? Will there be less independent workers? Will the models change, as Professor Curtin was talking about there? I think we will see much of that. Nonetheless, let's do the numbers. Sorry about this. I'm getting a little bit carried away here. To escape the reality of, so let's go to the BBC now and we'll finish up here. This the 29th is what we are here. The FTSE was down 305.49. That's the FTSE 100. In Amsterdam, they were down 18.06. In France, they were down 192.09. In Frankfurt, the DAX was down 368.44, or 3.68%. The Eurostas 50, it was also down 119.13. In Madrid, which is hard hit, but 255.3. Go to Bombay here, they were down 131.18. In Hong Kong, they were actually up 131.94. The Nikkei was also up 724.3. Now we'll go back to US. The Dow was down negative 4.06%, or 15.39. The Nasdaq was down 295.16, and the S&P was down 88.6, or 3.37%. The Nasdaq was down a negative 3.79%. And the Dow was down negative 4.06% there. So let's finish this up with the price of petroleum product, Brent crude, and it's going down from anyway at futures. So we're at $24.93, no change there. And West Texas crude was at $21.51. T. Boone Pickens' ancestors are still jumping for joy there, because they're in business. Now on the Forex, the gold was up $29.35 at $1,634.80. So gold was up, it was down, and I don't have the Russell 200 here, but again, just looking at some of what was going on here. I got back to the old BBC here. Uncertainty. The future of China's electric car makers. I don't know. The air is better there, but they got some traffic off the street. So there's a flip side there to basically what is going on. So we have done the numbers now, and this is Numbers Man on the 29th of March 2000. Oh, let me just one other thing. I'm sorry about that. Heather Long in the Washington Post has a very good article here. We don't want to go into, but the $2.2 trillion relief bill is massive, but it won't prevent a recession. And this is just basically, she has knocked us home. They passed it, the Senate there. Good news, the majority of the money is going to laid off workers, small business owners, medical centers, state and local governments. The bad news, it won't be enough to stop a recession. And this is, it's an open question whether the nation can avoid an economic depression, the likes of which haven't been seen since the 30s. By any measures, a huge stimulus bill. One thing, it can't stop the recession. This is James McCann, a senior economist at Aberdeen Standard Investment Group. And this is, economists say Congress' response was too slow, too staggered, and too focused on big Wall Street firms during the Great Recession, that we call it Depression, and prevented a faster turnaround. Many analysts say Congress deserves some credit for doing better this time. The relief package is more than double. That was $830 billion in 2009. But still, you got to get the money out there. A middle and lower class state to get. This is a $1,200 check for most people with kids. Small business owners soon get access to $10,000 emergency grants. Some states will also be throwing money into that pot. About a quarter of the money will go to large companies, this time around including billions earmarked for Boeings and airliners. Boeing said they didn't want theirs, but economists say two problems remain: fixing the health crisis and getting money out on time. Constance Hunter, she's the chief economist at KPMG, predicts it will take at least, now if it takes at least 6 to 10 weeks for the government to get a significant amount of money dispersed, that's a long time for laid off workers, small business owners with no money coming in. That's true. There'll be a lot of people in line here. James Bullard, he's at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, put a chilling forecast out ahead. He expects 46 million Americans to be unemployed. That would be 30%. That's slightly higher than in the Great Depression. An unprecedented 50% decline in output. And he also expects some sort of nation slowing down. Anyway, he expects the economy to recover quick. Bullard is optimistic the economy will bounce back in the second half. That would be in Q3, Q4. He compares it to driving a car at 70 miles an hour on the highway, then they're having to slow a curve in a construction. This is not, the pandemic is not a construction site. It would be a major hole in a bridge and you couldn't get across. Anyway, that is not enough to have Congress pass something or to have the feds put new programs in place to preserve liquidity. Is actually the execution of these programs that matter, no doubt about that. To get a reality check of what's happening, the U.S. economy calls a small business owner, and nearly all of them will tell you that business is severely down or closed. In recent days, most owners have talked to the Small Business Administration about getting a loan and aid, but everyone is waiting to see what Congress will. I'll give an example of somebody named John Russell. He has a small tech company called Web Connect, and his company makes affordable software for fundraising. That's not going to be going on now. Processed about $1 billion in credit card payments last week. And for now, their events, 2020 events, are canceled. They employed, 41 people. Our team is like a family. They're scraping by. A lot of small businesses are scraping by. That's about all you can say. They are scraping. Anyway, this is Heather Long's article. She covers the Fed. For the Washington Post, there's no economic playbook for how to handle this health crisis. Congress and the White House have taken the first step, but most economists anticipate more will be needed. The only thing that will truly turn this around is ending the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. They must end the pandemic. Anyway, nonetheless, for those in business, obviously, if it is still in business, be careful. For the consumer, obviously, you're waiting on Amazon.